It had been a whirlwind of a wedding. Emma and Lucas had spent months planning their dream ceremony, carefully crafting every detail. Now, the stress had melted away, replaced by a sense of blissful exhaustion. They were newly married and desperate for some peace and quiet to simply be with each other. Wanting to avoid the chaos of city resorts and crowded beaches, they searched for a secluded retreat and settled on a charming old hotel tucked away in the hills of Vermont. It was a place called Whispering Pines Inn, a rustic bed and breakfast known for its tranquil surroundings and vintage charm. The online photos showed ivy-covered stone walls, creaky wooden staircases, and cozy rooms with fireplaces. It looked like something out of a romance novel, perfect for a romantic honeymoon. They arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon. The trees were ablaze with orange and gold, and the air smelled of pine and fallen leaves. The hotel stood tall, a timeless three-story structure that seemed frozen in another era. An older woman at the front desk greeted them with a warm, practiced smile. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said, handing them a brass key attached to a leather tag marked 213. "Room 213 is one of our most private. You'll love it. Just remember, respect the peace here. The inn has character." Emma and Luca smiled politely and made their way up the stairs. The hallway to their room was long and narrow, lined with faded wallpaper and dim wall lamps. Room 213 sat at the end, its door slightly warped with age. Inside, the room was cozy and softly lit. The four-poster bed was dressed in crisp white linens, and a small fireplace sat across from a pair of armchairs. It was exactly the kind of peaceful atmosphere they had been hoping for. They unpacked, poured themselves glasses of wine, and sat by the window, soaking in the quiet. Finally, Lucas sighed. "No noise, no phones, just us." That first night, after dinner at a nearby restaurant, they returned to their room and curled up in bed. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and the inn creaked gently like a sleeping giant. But just as they began to drift off, a sound broke the stillness, a soft, rhythmic scratching from the corner of the room. Lucas sat up, listening. It was coming from near the old wooden wardrobe. He waited, assuming it was the building settling, or perhaps an animal outside. But the scratching continued, slow, deliberate, and unsettling. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered. Lucas nodded. "It's probably nothing. This place is old." But the sounds didn't stop. Around midnight, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Emma pulled the covers tighter around her. The heater clicked on, but the chill didn't lift. Then came the tapping, light, quick, and unnervingly human. It echoed along the baseboard, then stopped suddenly. The couple lay still, hearts pounding, listening to the silence. A minute passed. Then another. Just as they started to relax, the wardrobe creaked loudly, like something shifting inside. Emma gasped. "What if someone's in there?" she whispered. Lucas, trying to stay calm, got up and slowly approached the wardrobe. He flung the doors open. Empty. Nothing but two unused hangers swinging slightly, as if they'd just been touched. The next morning, neither of them mentioned the events of the night. It felt absurd in the daylight, like a shared dream. They went into town, visited local shops, and enjoyed each other's company. But as the sun began to set, a sense of dread crept in. Neither wanted to return to the room, though neither said it aloud. That evening, after dinner and a short walk through the woods, they returned to room 213. As soon as they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was dense, colder than it had been outside. Emma rubbed her arms and frowned. "It's freezing in here." Lucas checked the thermostat, 68 degrees. He turned on the fireplace, but the chill lingered. Then the television clicked on by itself. The screen glowed with static. Lucas reached for the remote, confused. He turned it off, but within seconds, it powered on again. This time, the static was louder. The screen flickered, and for a brief moment, a shadowy figure appeared, a blurry silhouette just standing still. Then it vanished. Emma clutched Lucas's arm. "Did you see that?" He didn't answer. The television crackled again, and this time a voice came through the static, low, garbled, impossible to understand, but clearly a voice. It sent a wave of panic through them both. Emma didn't want to stay another second. "We have to tell someone," she said. Lucas agreed. They left the room and hurried down the stairs to the front desk. The lobby was empty, but moments later, Mrs. Harrow emerged from the back office. She looked at them knowingly. "Room 213?" she asked. Emma's eyes widened. "Yes, how did you?" Mrs. Harrow sighed and motioned for them to sit. "That room's been different since long before I started working here. Some guests hear noises. Others see things. A couple even left in the middle of the night. The spirits there don't take kindly to being disturbed." Emma blinked. "Spirits?" The woman nodded. "This place has history. A century ago, a newlywed couple stayed in that room. No one knows exactly what happened, but they were found days later, gone cold in their sleep. Ever since then, strange things happen to couples in that room. Like it doesn't want them there." Lucas scoffed lightly, trying to maintain some grip on logic. "So why do you still rent it out?" Mrs. Harrow shrugged. "Some people don't notice a thing. Others, well, it depends on what the room sees in you." That night, against their better judgment, they returned to room 213. They considered asking for a new room, but the inn was fully booked for a local harvest festival. Emma, too tired and shaken to argue, crawled into bed. Lucas locked the wardrobe and left a lamp on. The hours ticked by slowly. Around 1 a.m., Emma sat bolt upright. Someone was humming a soft, eerie tune that seemed to drift through the walls. She shook Lucas awake. They listened together as the hum grew louder, then stopped abruptly. A beat of silence. Then, the mirror across the room fogged up without warning. Letters began to form on the glass, as though traced by an unseen hand, "Do not disturb." Terrified, they jumped out of bed. The mirror cracked down the center. The scratching resumed, this time louder, frantic, coming from beneath the bed and behind the walls. The lights flickered violently. Emma screamed as the wardrobe doors flew open, revealing nothing inside, but the cold that poured out was unbearable, like the room was exhaling. The bed began to tremble beneath them. A distant wailing echoed from somewhere deep in the inn. "We need to leave now," Lucas said. They didn't pack. They didn't look back. They ran. Down the stairs, out the front door, and into the parking lot, barefoot and shaking. They drove through the night until they found a small 24-hour diner 30 miles away. They didn't speak for hours. Neither slept that night. The next morning, they returned only to collect their things. Mrs. Harrow was waiting at the door. She didn't ask any questions. She handed them their belongings and said only one thing as they left: some rooms just aren't meant to be disturbed. Emma and Lucas never spoke of room 213 again. They told friends their honeymoon had been quiet and peaceful. But at night, when the lights are off and the world is still, they both sometimes hear it, that soft scratching sound, just beyond the walls. Have you ever stayed in a hotel room that felt wrong? Where the silence was too heavy or the darkness too deep? Some rooms carry memories, and others, something more. Share your story. Tell us what you saw, what you heard. But whatever you do, if the mirror fogs and the words "do not disturb" appear, listen. Not every door should be opened. Tonight's story comes from the lonely highways of America, where one late-night traveler learned that sometimes, the smallest things, like a hotel window that won't stay shut, can open the door to the darkest night of your life. This is the window that won't shut. It was late September, and the rain had been falling for hours as Emily drove down I-70 through Ohio. 20 years old, traveling solo to visit a friend in Chicago, she had already been behind the wheel for 9 straight hours. Exhausted, her eyes burned with every blink. She knew she couldn't make it another 100 miles without stopping. So, just past midnight, she pulled off at an exit lit by a buzzing neon sign, "Lakewood Inn, vacancy." The building loomed at the edge of the highway, 3 stories tall, with peeling paint and a flickering open sign above the front office. Not exactly inviting, but it was better than falling asleep at the wheel. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and lemon cleaner. The night clerk was a gaunt man with sunken eyes who hardly looked up as Emily signed the register. He slid her a plastic key card and muttered, "Room 312. Elevators down the hall." The elevator groaned as it lifted her to the 3rd floor. The carpet in the hallway was stained, the wallpaper bubbled in places. Her room was at the very end of the corridor, far from the few other occupied rooms. She swiped the card, stepped inside, and dropped her bag with a sigh. The room was small, just a queen bed, a dresser, a desk, and a single window overlooking the parking lot. She flicked on the light and froze. The window was cracked open an inch, the thin curtain shifting with the breeze. On the 3rd floor, that struck her as strange. She walked over, slid the pane shut, and locked the latch. Maybe housekeeping had been sloppy. She shrugged it off, changed into sweatpants, and ordered a late-night burger from a nearby delivery app. By the time her food arrived, she had mostly forgotten about the window. She ate on the bed, watching a true crime documentary on her laptop. The sound of the rain outside mixed with the hum of the AC. It almost felt cozy. But not 20 minutes later, she felt it again, a draft. She turned, and her heart skipped. The window was open again. Wider this time. Emily set down her food and got up, frowning. She shut it firmly, tested the latch, and tugged hard just to be sure it stayed in place. For a moment, she considered calling the front desk, but she laughed at herself. It was just a window. Just an old hotel with shoddy maintenance. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that followed. By 1:30 a.m., she was tucked under the covers, scrolling her phone. The rain had stopped, but the highway outside droned with the occasional passing truck. Sleep tugged at her eyes when a sound cut through the silence, a faint scrape. She sat up, listening. The scrape came again. Long, slow. Fingernails across glass. Emily's chest tightened. She turned toward the window. The curtain shifted slightly, though the air was still. She slid out of bed, heart hammering, and pulled them open. The window gaped wide. And smeared along the glass were streaks, as though someone had dragged their fingers down the pane. Emily slammed it shut, her hands trembling. This time she shoved the desk chair under the sill for extra measure. She locked the latch, yanked the curtains closed, and crawled back into bed. She told herself it was a trick of the mind, that she was overtired. But her body stayed tense, every muscle tight, listening. At 2:15 a.m., she jolted awake to a different sound. Not the scrape. A creak. The sound of the floorboards near the desk. Inside the room. Her breath caught. She didn't move. Slowly, she pulled her phone from the nightstand, flicked on the flashlight, and shone it toward the desk. The chair was pushed aside. The window was open again. And crouched in the shadows just inside was a figure. A man. He was thin, gaunt, his skin pale and dirty, his hair stringy and damp. His wide grin revealed crooked, yellow teeth. His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. "You keep shutting my window," he rasped. Emily screamed, bolting off the bed. She sprinted for the door, fumbling with the lock as the man's footsteps pounded behind her. She wrenched it open and burst into the hallway, her cries echoing down the empty corridor. Doors opened. Groggy guests peered out as the night clerk rushed from the elevator. Emily pointed back at her room, gasping, "Someone's inside." He came through the window. By the time police arrived minutes later, the room was empty. The curtain swayed gently, the window wide open. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. The officers searched the stairwells, the lobby, even the roof, but they found nothing. They suggested it could have been a vagrant who slipped away in the confusion. They told Emily she was safe, but she refused to stay another night. She checked out immediately, suitcase in hand, eyes darting to every shadow. Before leaving, she overheard the manager muttering to one of the officers, "That room's been a problem for years. Guests always complain about the window. Maintenance swears it's fine, but it just won't stay shut." Emily drove until dawn, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. But the image of that man's grin burned itself into her memory. Even now, months later, when she stays in hotels, she checks the windows over and over. She locks them, blocks them with furniture, even tapes them shut if she has to. But in the quiet hours of the night, sometimes she still hears it, the faint scrape of nails against glass, testing, waiting. Because sometimes, a hotel window isn't broken at all. Sometimes it's an invitation. And sometimes it won't stay shut. It was a quiet evening in late October when the Callahan family checked into the old hotel nestled in a small, forgotten town in the heart of the United States. John and Rebecca, both in their late 30s, had decided to take their two children, Emily, aged 10, and Charlie, aged 6, on a weekend getaway to celebrate the end of the school year. The air was crisp, the trees a fiery mix of red, orange, and yellow, and the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows over the empty streets. Their destination, the Hollow Springs Inn. An establishment that had been in operation since the 1800s, with a history as long as the town itself. It was charming in its own way, with its weathered brick exterior, vintage wallpaper in the hallways, and squeaky wooden floors that seemed to echo the whispers of a past long gone. The hotel had recently been refurbished, though, with modern amenities, Wi-Fi, flat-screen TVs, and heated pools. Everything seemed fine at first glance. But there was something about the place that didn't feel entirely right. The check-in process was quick. The receptionist, a pale woman in her 50s with sharp features, greeted them with a thin smile. "Room 111, she said, handing over the keys. "It's a bit special, but you'll enjoy your stay." Rebecca, slightly confused, smiled back. "Special? In what way?" The receptionist paused, her eyes darting briefly toward the ceiling before she quickly cleared her throat. "Oh, nothing to worry about. Just an old room. All the charm, you know? Just make sure not to wander after dark. The hallways can get a little strange." John chuckled, trying to brush off the odd remark. "Thanks for the warning," he said, taking the keys and leading his family toward the elevator. Room 111 was located on the third floor, at the far end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a spacious room with antique furniture, an oversized four-poster bed, a velvet armchair near the window, and an old oak wardrobe in the corner. There was a musty smell in the air, but it wasn't enough to turn them away. Emily immediately rushed to the window, pressing her face against the glass and peering out into the darkening evening. "This place is so cool," she said, excited by the large, vintage feel of the room. Charlie ran toward the bed, jumping up and down. "I want to sleep here tonight." Rebecca smiled at her children's enthusiasm. "Well, it's going to be our home for the next couple of days, so let's make the most of it." John, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed the edges of the curtains fluttering in an almost unnatural way, even though the window was firmly closed. It felt like there was a draft, yet there was no source for it. He shrugged it off, figuring it was just the building's age catching up with it. After unpacking, the Callahans decided to take a walk around the town. They enjoyed a casual dinner at a local diner, with the owner, an elderly man with a deep southern drawl, telling them stories about the history of Hollow Springs. He mentioned the hotel briefly but spoke of it in hushed tones, as if not wanting to draw attention to its past. "You folks be careful with that hotel," he said, leaning in closer. "A lot of strange things happen there. You might think it's all harmless at first, but you'd be wrong. Stay away from room 111 if you know what's good for YA." John laughed, thinking the man was just playing a part to entertain the tourists. "Thanks for the tip," he said, dismissing it as an old man's superstition. By the time they returned to the hotel, the sun had set, and the building had taken on an even more eerie presence. The hallway was now completely dark, with only dim lights flickering overhead. As they reached room 111, Rebecca unlocked the door, and they stepped inside. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. The warm air they had left behind now felt cold, almost icy. Emily and Charlie were already climbing into bed, their faces glowing with excitement from the day's adventures. But John and Rebecca both felt a lingering sense of unease. The room seemed to hum with a strange energy. John went to the bathroom to wash up, and when he returned, he noticed the shadows in the room seemed deeper, darker, as if they were moving on their own. The corner of the room, near the wardrobe, felt especially cold. He could almost feel someone, or something, watching him. He shook his head, trying to rationalize the feeling. It was just the stress of travel, he told himself. Rebecca, however, was having her own unsettling experience. She had heard faint footsteps in the hallway, light and quick, as if someone were running. But when she opened the door to check, no one was there. "John," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think we should go down to the lobby and ask for a different room." Before John could respond, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. Charlie, who had been playing with his toy car, suddenly stopped and looked toward the wardrobe. His eyes widened in terror. "Mommy, Daddy, there's someone in the closet." Rebecca and John turned, but the wardrobe door was closed. There was no sound, no movement. It was as if the room had frozen. That night, the haunting escalated. The family barely slept. Emily had nightmares of shadowy figures standing by her bed, whispering things she couldn't understand. Charlie was up several times, screaming that he saw someone standing in the hallway. But when John opened the door, nothing was there. By morning, the Callahans were exhausted and on edge. John, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize it all. "Old buildings do strange things," he muttered. "There's got to be a logical explanation for everything." But that afternoon, when Rebecca returned from the lobby after a visit to the front desk, she looked pale, her face etched with fear. She pulled John aside. "They know about room 111, she whispered, her voice shaking. "They told me it's been the site of strange occurrences for decades. People have disappeared. Some have claimed to see figures in the mirrors, others have heard voices, like someone's calling their name. And the last family who stayed here, well, they didn't make it out." John's heart raced. He was beginning to believe there was something more to the hotel than just age and wear. The stories he had dismissed as superstition were starting to feel all too real. On their last night, the atmosphere in room 111 became suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the air was thick with tension. Emily was crying, clutching her stuffed bear tightly, while Charlie refused to leave his parents' side. The mirrors began to fog up, even though the room was far too cold for condensation to form. As they huddled together in the center of the room, the door to the wardrobe slowly creaked open on its own. The temperature dropped so sharply that their breaths fogged in the air. And then, it began. Soft whispers, like distant voices, echoed through the room, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. The shadows in the corner began to twist, taking on shapes that no one could explain. John grabbed Rebecca's hand, pulling her and the children toward the door. "Run," he whispered, his voice a mix of fear and determination. But as they reached the hallway, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, trapping them in the dark corridor. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably coming from behind them. They turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the dark, its form barely discernible but its presence unmistakable. It was time to leave. The Callahans never returned to Hollow Springs Inn. They checked out the next morning, their spirits broken, their nerves frazzled, and their minds haunted by the horrors they'd experienced in room 111. They left town, but the memory of that night stayed with them forever. No one else dared to stay in room 111 after the Callahans left. The hotel eventually closed its doors, and Hollow Springs faded into obscurity. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the faint whispers of those who were lost in that cursed room, waiting for someone else to wander in and disturb the silence once more. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A shadow in the corner of your eye, a cold draft in a room that should be warm, or a voice when no one else is around? Share your own paranormal experiences with us. Who knows, your story might be the next to haunt room 111.